Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Ray Eitel-Porter and we've got Dr. Paul Dongha. And we're going to be talking about their new book, Governing the Machine, which I've read and is an excellent book about governance of AI. It's very timely, I would say, because it's one of those things where there seems to be a lot of discussion on LinkedIn. How do we do this? And then you brought the book out, but we'll talk about it. So where can people find you, Ray and Paul?
I would say on LinkedIn, actually, and I have the distinction of being the only Ray Eitel-Porter, as far as I'm aware, in the world with that weird surname.
And Tim, lovely to be here. Same for me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Paul Dongha, and we are launching our Substack as well to go with the book. So for those that order the book, there's a Substack page on the inside, and we will be posting on there.
Fantastic. Substack is the fashionable thing to do, I believe. So excellent. So opening question: what was the inspiration behind the starting to write the book?
Well, I'd been working in the sort of AI governance, responsible AI space for, I guess, something like about 8 years, and seeing the power of AI getting stronger and stronger, its capability, but also noticing that companies were becoming increasingly nervous about deploying AI as we moved into generative AI, and now people talking about AI agents. And I thought that it was time to actually take a step back from having advised companies on how to do this, how to use AI without it going wrong, which for me is basically what AI governance is about, and to put down my guidance into a book. And I got about probably a couple of months into writing it, and then I thought, you know what, I really need someone who is deeply technical to help me with some of the technical sections here. And that's when I turned to Paul. And I also figured that we needed a qualified lawyer on the team. And so our third author, who couldn't be with us today, is Miriam Vogel, who is both a qualified lawyer, but also in the US, and was chair of President Biden's AI advisory committee. So she brought the US angle to things as well.
Paul.
Yeah, and Tim, from my side, I mean, when Ray approached me, I mean, instantly I just said yes. I mean, this. I'm so passionate about this subject. So I started my AI journey back in the 90s. My PhD was in artificial intelligence, and I used to teach it at university and do some research. After a long detour into other roles, all technical roles at banks, I got into AI ethics. And at the time Ray approached me, I was head of data and AI ethics at Lloyds Banking Group. And my day-to-day job was actually helping the bank to mitigate the risks of AI and get AI to do what they want it to do. So when Ray approached me, I was like, yes, this is what I do, and I feel very passionate about it. And I'm really lucky because I do the work that I feel passionate about.
Excellent.
So yeah.
So you highlight that AI governance is a collective effort rather than solely a technical problem. Who is the audience for Governing the Machine?
Well, we very much positioned this as a book for senior business leaders, but also for individuals who want to know how they can have an influence on the sort of responsible use of AI. Within an organization, I think it's critical that a senior leader who is both committed, has budget and political clout leads the AI governance program, but he or she needs to bring the rest of the organization along with them. You can't do it just out of the technical department, or just out of the legal department, or just out of the risk and compliance department. It needs all of those, plus it needs HR, and it needs other people to be involved as well. A broad audience is really for our book.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting was, because I've read a couple of books about AI governance in the last 3-4 months, and they approach it quite differently, because they actually see the CISO, so the Chief Information Security Officer, or a chief AI officer as being the person that actually lead it, whereas you're talking very much about it coming from the CEO, which is quite different.
Yeah, I mean, I think CEO is ideal. Obviously, not every organization is going to get that kind of level of buy-in, especially maybe in really large organizations. But it really helps if you've got a board member who is behind it, and not just behind it in name, but actually putting their weight behind it. In some ways, it's no different to any other kind of big cultural change or transformation program in an organization. The better senior leadership you get, the more success, frankly, you're going to have.
Yeah. In the book, you've got a governance framework which addresses 9 core categories of risk, including accuracy and reliability, fairness and bias, explainability, accountability, data privacy, and environmental and sustainability. Which of these 9 risks do you find that organizations most frequently underestimate, and how does the book help leaders to address them?
Okay, should I start on this one, Ray? You're right, Tim. We landed on 9, and I think it's worth pointing out that we surveyed a number of sets of principles out there, and UNESCO, OECD, the UK government, the EU AI Act. There are a wide-ranging sets of principles, some of which are legislation, some of which are guidance and voluntary. And we synthesized those to really land on what we thought were the most impactful ones, and ones that are probably going to be enduring. So they will be around for a long time and need to be dealt with. So that was quite a journey to land on those. That doesn't mean there aren't others, but I think for the biggest ones, it's those. I think for me, I'll probably just talk about 2. The bias and fairness issue is one that really, launched AI ethics as a field of study, where in 2016-17, we were beginning to see machine learning systems, which is early AI, discriminate against certain groups, certain minority groups, and not include them in certain decisions. So that really launched the field. That still exists. Right, that is still a problem. And we talk about a number of techniques that firms can employ to mitigate those risks and remove them, by and large. So we talk at length about that. And I think that's such an important topic that you have to have it front and center because of the way AI systems work on the data that they're trained on. And I think the second, so that's definitely one, right? That's a big one for all organizations, particularly those in regulated industries, where they really have a regulatory responsibility, really, to make sure they don't cause harm. And the other one that I know Ray and I talk about, Ray knows it's a bit of a passion of mine, is we're all hearing about generative AI and the build out of data centers. So that's putting strain on water resources, climate, and on the grid as well. And of course, with the generative AI being developed by some of the biggest tech companies, that's putting further strain on all of that. And the book points organizations to certain recommendations that we think that they should undertake, like measuring their use of AI, measuring their carbon impact from their use by thinking about data centers, thinking about green ops and things like this. I think it's really, really important that those still happen.
Yeah, you cover a lot in the book, don't you, in terms of the legislation from GDPR onwards, really, which is fascinating.
Tim, can I jump in with one other thing, which I guess is increasingly concerning me, and that is the risk of people over relying on AI. So, as we talk about human in the loop as being one of the ways of making sure that AI is okay. What human in the loop basically means is that, that the AI does something, but a person checks it before it actually goes live. So let's say it's a medical situation, you get a recommendation from the AI, but a doctor should be the one who actually looks at it and decides, yes, this is a good piece of advice or not. The danger is that we're seeing people, when they're working with AI, becoming a bit over-reliant on it and assuming that the AI is right. But we all know from our use of ChatGPT that it often isn't. It makes stuff up, right? And it makes very plausible stuff up. So I think how we train people to be alert and on the ball and using it in the right way, but keeping that sense of checking and what have you, I think is going to be absolutely critical.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, anybody that's been using AI for a little while knows that it can give wrong answers, and we have to check it.
Yeah.
So you provide a detailed blueprint for establishing an AI governance program. Given the rapid pace of AI adoption with critical design considerations, should guide the design of an AI governance process?
Yeah, I think there's probably two or three things I would say. One key question that you need to think about at the beginning is, how are we going to actually define AI? So there is no official definition. There's quite a few that float around, and there's a bit of a consensus coming towards sort of the one that's used by the EU and by the OECD and so on. But there's a question about how broad or how narrow do you want to define AI? And the risk, if you define it very narrowly, is that people in the organization will just sort of say, well, what we're doing isn't AI. And they find that that's a nice convenient way to avoid any of the scrutiny that maybe should take place. But of course, if you define it very broadly, you're going to end up assessing many, many more applications. So there's a balance there between the volume that you can cope with as an organization. Ideally, you want to kind of take a quick look at everything, do a risk assessment, and then if it's high risk, you want to dig deeper. And if it's low risk, well, fine, just leave it and get on with it. The other sort of design consideration I would think about is probably starting with a smallish central team of people who are really expert in the space. And then once you've sort of established some key principles, policies, approach, and so on, then you can start to sort of push it out through the organization. Because ultimately what you want is this to be part of normal everyday business for people across the organization, rather than some sort of central police force, checking everything. But it's probably good to establish it with a smaller set of experts who then become the advisors and the helpers and the support for the rest of the organization over time.
Yeah, I was talking to someone recently, and they said that I said, "What do you do?" And they said, "I'm a subject matter expert for the Copilot rollout in my company." I said, "Oh, that must be fascinating." She said, "It is, but what I found is that actually nobody wants to use it." And I said, "Why is that?" They said, "Because they're too scared." And she said one of the objections she got was, if I start using it, it will take my job. And that's a classic example of there was a kind of certain amount in that company of build it and they will come. Of course everybody's excited about AI, are they? And so you talk about in the book about AI challenges, and you talk about the unpredictability of AI. Like hallucinations and things like that. Tell us about that, Paul.
Yeah. So the word hallucinations is being used now to refer to exactly when ChatGPT makes something up. Number one, I don't really agree with using that word, because humans hallucinate. IT stuff doesn't hallucinate, right? It doesn't have an imagination. It can't really hallucinate. But the central idea is, look, the way ChatGPT operates is it predicts effectively tokens. Tokens are like vowels. They're parts of words. And what it will do is it will, given a sequence of preceding words, it will predict the most likely next token and add it to the end of the sequence. And then it will look at that whole sequence and it will predict the next most likely token. And this is a technical term for this. It's called autoregressive decoding. I don't know why it has to be a complicated term, but it is. At its essence, at its absolute essence, that is what it's doing. And it's doing that by having been trained. There's this concept of training an AI model. Training means effectively ingesting the model with lots and lots of text. So ChatGPT has been trained on much of the content that's publicly available on the web, including Wikibooks and some other sites which aren't so good. So And the thing is, it operates without explainability, right? So even the designers of those AI systems can't tell you beforehand how it will behave. So you can't predict how it will behave. What it means is you can't predict the next token yourself. The system just goes off and produces stuff. And as Ray says, it's very, very plausible and extremely convincing, which is, I think, what's most dangerous about it. If it was obviously wrong, that would be a warning sign right there. But it's because it's so plausible. So I think we have to be really guarded on that front. And as Ray said as well, the guarding against automation bias is a big risk. Ensuring that people still have critical thinking skills and don't over rely on AI to do some of the more critical thinking parts of jobs is also really important. And finally, Tim, I'll just add to the point that you raised earlier, right? People being afraid of AI taking their jobs. Certainly it's not really spelled out in the book, but if AI is going to be around, our recommendation is certainly embrace it and use it positively to augment your job, to make your job easier, to allow you to do more that you otherwise would want to do but can't do. And that requires active management, Tim. And in governing the machine, we do call out to organizations to train their staff, have different levels of training for different personas, and talk to staff about AI in a very positive way.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Tim. I was going to say I've been I sit on the ethics advisory board for a sort of medium-sized government organization, and they've mandated 4 hours of AI training for everybody in the company, and that's a big investment, right? And actually, I don't see a lot of private companies doing that much, but they've seen a massive increase in people's confidence and willingness to engage with AI under very clearly defined rules, etc. But people have turned from being nervous, like you described, to being, oh, actually, you know what? I think I understand a bit about this now, so I trust it, and I kind of know what I'm allowed to do with it and what I shouldn't do with it, and so on.
Can you describe as well your recommended approach in setting up controls and the role that AI governance platform may play?
Yeah, so Tim, on so a few things on controls. So many organizations, certainly large organizations like banks, have a mature risk management function because they're a part of a regulated industry. They will have professionals there whose job is to do risk management. Now, what we propose in the book is we certainly take that those processes and augment them, right? Augment them in a big way, though, and that really means working with those risk professionals to go through the AI risks and allow them to go through a process of doing risk tiering. So whenever they look at an AI system, they need to examine it through the lens of the possible AI risks that are out there. There are 9 we mentioned, and really rate that system with respect to those 9 and identify things like bias and unfairness and potential inaccuracies and so on. And really what that does is that engages the risk management machinery in the organization. And some of the tools there, right, if you look at tools, we definitely recommend that organizations have an ethics committee or an ethics panel. Sounds scary. You don't need to be an AI ethics specialist or a philosopher or so on. There is a certain amount of training that people need to be able to participate. And in an ethics panel or an ethics board, your job is to challenge the use case and see if you can tease out the possibility of things like unfair bias, which is never in the designer's mind. So there's a whole process around how to do that. There's a whole process around how to tier it, how to do risk tiering. And then finally, I mean, there are many other things, and it will take me quite a long time to go through them, but technical tooling as well. So many organizations, they'll have data scientists or machine learning engineers or some kind of IT function that will create or help create the AI system. They need to be equipped with Python libraries and tools that they can test the AI before they launch it. And that testing will surface certain metrics that will look at things like fairness and accuracy and bias, and even look for privacy and toxic language and all these kind of things. So there are technical tools being built out there. You can download them and install them. You can work with companies, with third-party providers. and who are all actively building technical tools to allow data scientists and machine learning engineers to put them in, test the system before it's deployed. And finally, there are equally tools now being created that once your AI system is deployed and running, it's monitored in the background. So if the AI system, creates some toxic output, that's trapped and not released to the public. That's a really simple example. So those are some of the things. But the gold standard at the moment, given that the technology is so nascent, is always to have what we call a human in the loop.
Yeah.
Which is, if you're going to use generative AI and you're going to send any of its output to customers, have someone check that output and validate it first. So we're still in the realm of doing that human validation. Is really critical.
And so, final question. One of the things about writing a book like this is that you write it in a certain point in time. And with both technology and regulation changing, how do you make sure that you've future-proofed your advice in the book?
Yeah, we thought a lot about this, and as you can imagine, we talked a lot with the publisher about it as well, with Bloomsbury, because we want the book to last. We fundamentally believe that actually the principles that we've set out in the book for setting up an AI governance foundation will hold for a long time. And we encourage people, as they're designing and setting up that AI governance process and framework in the organization, part of that needs to be continual monitoring of changes to regulation, changes to technology, changes indeed to how the organization is using AI, right? Because that's going to move over time. But your core foundational AI governance program should be flexible enough that it can adapt going forwards. And I'll give you one good example. So when just after ChatGPT came out, I was asked to go and address a group of senior lawyers, general counsel, and people like that. And what was really interesting was that there were a few companies in the room that had no AI governance historically in place. They were the ones who'd had to basically jump in and ban ChatGPT completely from being used while they figured out how they were going to come up with a policy and a process for approval and what people could and couldn't do with it. The companies that already had an AI governance process in place and a policy could relatively quickly just adapt it to say, oh, well, there's this new thing now, ChatGPT. All right, we need to change a few of the policies, change a few of the rules and what have you. But that's quite easy because we've got the core process in place. And I think that, that's what we would encourage people to put the process in place and then adapt it as things change.
Ray, Paul, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your new book, Governing the Machine. If I wanted to buy a copy, where can I get one from?
You can get it from Amazon, and you can get it from most good booksellers, as they say.
Excellent. And Ray, where can we find more information about you?
So go to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and we also have this Substack. It's called Governing the Machine AI, where we're going to be continually, continuing the conversation about AI governance.
Excellent. And Paul, where can we find more information about you?
Oh, similar to Ray, you can find me on LinkedIn. You will find me giving talks and other podcasts around the work that I do. My full-time position is at NatWest Bank, where I lead the bank's AI strategy, and I'm head of responsible AI. So in the financial services community, I'm quite well known.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you, Tim.
Ray and Paul, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your new book and sharing your expertise as well.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Tim.